You probably wouldn't build High Speed 2 if it was just to save a little passenger time or if it was just about keeping up with the French. The case for 225 mile per hour trains in this country rests or falls on the way it reshapes the nation's economic geography. Here was the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg speaking yesterday.
Tomorrow we're announcing the largest rail infrastructure project this country has ever seen, healing the north-south divide by investing in high-speed rail links between the two.
And that's the crux of it, trying to ensure that the economic hub, which is London, doesn't suck all the economic life out of the rest of the country. So what will the effect of HS2 be? It could take activity out of London into other parts of Britain, but it could do the reverse. Or how about this? It might take activity out of second-tier cities and send it to bigger cities. Good news for Birmingham at the expense of Wolverhampton, for example. It could give Britain big cities and small cities. No one seems quite sure as to the effects, but Professor John Tomaney has looked at it very closely from the School of Planning at UCL, University College London. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Right, now I know you've studied the effect of high-speed lines in other countries, so why don't you give us some examples of the sort of complicated ways in which these things can work from elsewhere?
Well, this argument that high-speed rail can reshape economic geography is being used in several countries around the world. If we look at France, Spain, South Korea, where these lines have been introduced, they've been introduced to deal with regional inequalities. But in practice, there's very little evidence that building a high-speed rail line heals north-south divides in the way that the Deputy Prime Minister was saying yesterday. On the contrary, in fact, the evidence seems to suggest that it's the capital cities which gain principally from these developments.
Right. So, I mean, give us an example of that effect, a specific line in a specific city.
Well, a very good example would be the Madrid to Seville line in Spain. That line was built in order to promote the growth of Seville, but in actual fact, following its completion, Madrid grew at a much faster rate than Seville, and in fact the gap between their economic performance is widened. But there are plenty of other examples. The relationship between Seoul and Busan in South Korea is very similar.
I mean, Lille in northern France was a very poor city, and that was one where you look at Lille itself, it's had a tremendous economic renaissance, hasn't it?
There's certainly been a lot of development around the Eura-Lille district, which is next to the high-speed rail line. But the larger region itself hasn't really benefited from this. There's no evidence that the Nord-Pas-de-Calais region, of which Lille is the main city, has closed the gap with the Paris region. And there's certainly evidence that some of the cities around Lille, like Tourcoing, Roubaix, have actually lost employment to Lille.
So that's this effect that's not been much talked about, which is you get bigger hubs along the line and smaller cities around, if you like, away from the line.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. Well, let's bring Sir Richard Leese in, who's chair of Manchester City Council. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's not a great line, I'm afraid, but what do you make of that analysis we've just heard from John Tomaney?
Well, I don't think it's an accurate analysis, because if you look at cities like Zaragoza in Spain, if you look at Lyon in France, if you do look at Lille, because of course a lot of those jobs lost are because of the change in the nature of industry rather than to do with high-speed rail. You see that it has given growth to regional cities in all over the world, and I think what it would do for cities like Manchester, cities like Leeds, cities like Sheffield and Birmingham, it doesn't guarantee growth. High-speed rail won't guarantee growth. What it does is give us a better chance, because at the moment our lines of communication are running out of capacity. And the small city issue, that in this small country, one of the advantages of the high-speed rail network, not only will it improve capacity for the major cities in the country, it will also free up capacity on what's now termed the classic network. So smaller towns and cities, places like Crewe, Stoke, Stafford, Coventry, Wolverhampton, which you mentioned, will all benefit from that increased capacity in the old network.
Right, so even though the small cities lose to the high-speed line because they're basically not on it, and Manchester is made more attractive at the expense of cities away from the high-speed line, they do at least get more room on the old line, which allows them to have better transport links to each other, for example.
Well, fundamentally, in the north of England and the Midlands, it's not about speed, although short journeys are better for the economy. It is about capacity. It's about more capacity for passengers and more capacity for freight as well. And again, one of the advantages of high-speed rail, it will give us more opportunity to take freight off the roads, in which case road users will benefit as well.
We have heard a lot about this capacity argument. I mean, when the West Coast Main Line franchise came up, it was common to all the bids, or the two main bids, Virgin and First Group, that they were planning on growing at 5 to 10% a year for the next decade or more. That doesn't really imply that there's no capacity on that line. It implies that there's actually quite a lot of capacity left on that line.
Well, if I look at the West Coast Main Line to Manchester, there is now a train every 20 minutes. The trains have got longer, and we're still in a position that at certain peak times within the week, trains are full and you can't get on them. We're talking for high-speed rail about 20 years from now, and you have to think about how those trains will get fuller and fuller over that period of time. And simply, probably by the middle of the next decade, we will have at peak times run out of capacity, and we need to address that, or places like Manchester, places at the north of England, not only will our economy not improve, if we don't have that connectivity, we will fall behind.
Yes, and that makes an important point, doesn't it, John Tomaney, that you need to have a counterfactual in mind when assessing the fate of, say, northern cities relative to capital cities in any of these schemes, because it might have been those areas would have all shrunk and done far worse without the line than with it. They may not have done brilliantly with it, but they might have done worse without it.
The question to me is that if the objective is promoting regional development, and if you have £30 billion to spend, what's the best way to spend it? There's an opportunity cost here. And the evidence that spending it on addressing capacity issues in the rail network, I don't think really bears up in relation to that objective. It's an article of faith that building the railway line will have this impact. If we take the example of Lyon, which Sir Richard mentioned earlier, there's very good evidence there that Lyon certainly saw development in the Pardieu district, but that many nationally headquartered French firms actually closed their offices in Lyon because they found it easier to serve that market centrally. Now, all I'm saying is that a lot of claims are being made here, and we need evidence rather than just articles of faith.
Are you actually against the line, Professor Tomaney?
I'm agnostic about the line. I think connectivity is extremely important in regional development. I think connectivity within regions is just as important as connectivity between regions, and I think that's an important issue which is not being debated here.
One last issue, right? This is another important one. It may be that there's a benefit that isn't a benefit to the shape of the country, that isn't just about northern regeneration, but is about releasing pressure on a very crowded capital. So housing is impossibly expensive in London for most people these days. Maybe you can, for example, extend the commuter belt of London to places like Birmingham or north of Birmingham, because you have a very fast link. And maybe that is an economic benefit in allowing the London economy to develop, and the housing zone, if you like, for that, the travel to work area for London to be far, far bigger.
Well, that's a very good point, and I think that's probably what is going to be the main effect of this, that Birmingham will be brought into, if you like, the greater southeast labour market economic zone, if you like. That raises some very big questions for places further north, and particularly for those places which are not directly connected to the new HS2 line, including places like Newcastle, where I am at the moment.